sorry. Hi friends, we're going to do this Flex Our Blocks assignment. It's just a practice assignment, but we're going to walk through that so that way we can understand exactly how we can do this. So it really consists of two parts, and I think some students were confused, and this is where we're really going to utilize divs, and really these kind of container elements, if you will. And so what we're going to do is we're really just going to take our HTML code and let's see what we get there. And we'll kind of start building through the CSS. So here we've got our HTML. I've got a file here called DisplayFlex. If I come here, we're good to go. I think it was already there anyway, but I can like this. Perfect. Okay. We've got a couple things going on. Now notice we don't have any metadata. That's okay. You don't necessarily need it, like that viewport or like UTF-8. That's okay. By default, you have it. But just here, if you're like, why is that not there? That's okay. It'll work, especially for what we're doing right now. Now I want to maybe put these side by side so we can look at kind of the code. And let me make this a little bit smaller. So that way we can kind of identify what the heck is going on here. Okay. So here's my code. There we go. We've got our head, right? And that just really is just what we will see up top whenever we run it. So no big deal. And then we've got this style sheet. We haven't created the style sheet yet, but we know that this is going to be a style sheet. And you see that there's this type text/CSS. That is optional. You don't have to have that. We haven't had that through class, but that is just some optional code if you wanted to add in some sort of data there. But really, the main things we want to talk about is we want to talk about this div and our body, realistically our body. So our body is our parent, right, of everything that's within this. And so if I'm looking at this before we even kind of get started on the code portion, if I'm looking at this, I want to first look and say, okay, what do I think needs to be a group, or what do I think needs to be a div? And let me first identify what I would do from a perspective of building out this page. So if I were to look at this, I would say, okay, I've got this big white space. I'm assuming that's the body, right? And then I've got this gray box right here. What this gray box is sort of, oops, right there, sorry. That is telling me that that is my container, right? Everything I have goes within that gray box. You can see that it all sort of fits on top of that. So what that first and foremost tells me is that I need to have some sort of div that is a parent to all of this information in here, right? It's a parent to this green box, this blue box, this red box, these yellow boxes, and this purple box, right? Okay, so I have my first div. I know that to be true. Now, secondly, what I want to do is I want to look and say, okay, is there anything else I want to compartmentalize and or build and or have a div or some sort of container for? Well, this green box is just by itself, right? It goes all the way across. I don't necessarily need anything for that, right? There's nothing side by side. I'm not really working with anything. Secondly, if you would have had this entire portion in a div, I would have understood. Remember, our rule is we can't just have one item in a div, so we cannot just like do this. Because if it's just one item, then we can target just that specific item. It's not really doing anything for us, right? But if you would have said something like this is one div, I would have accepted that. They didn't do that here, but that would have been fine. Oh, they did do that here, actually. Sorry. They did do that here, right? So we have this container. That's my big gray box. And then we have our top nav, which is just its own element. And then you see the next sibling it's got is this black box. You can kind of think about it where this outline is that is my next, and we call that a row, right? And so what I can do is say, okay, these are my two elements. Now let me go one more step deeper. Again, we don't need anything around this blue box because it is a-okay, right? We don't need anything. It's just by itself, so I don't need anything more. But then when I get here, I see that there's multiple elements within this red box, right? So that would tell me that I would also have a div. I'll go like this, that way you can still see the black. I would also have a div that is this red box that is the parent to this yellow and these purple. And we see that just on our right? We have this div that's called row. Now we'll see why we could call these the same class in a bit. But just knowing that these are, this is my row. And then within this, I've got a couple things. I've got these three subcontinents, or sorry, this is main. Sorry about that. Okay, let's kind of backtrack. This orange one is my main div. And within that, I even have one more, right? That way I can satisfy all arrangements that is like this. I've got one, that's a terrible color. I've got one around these guys right here, and I call this row, right? Within that, I've got three elements called subcontents. So it's these yellow. And then next to it, or also as a parent of this row, is this purple box. Okay. So now I've identified, okay, from this image, I've created a main div. I'm calling this container. Within that, I have two elements, two exact children, this green and this black box, which is a div. Within this black box, I've got two elements, this blue and this red. And within the red, I've got two elements, this box called row that's around these yellow, and this purple bar called, we call this advertisement. Okay. Any thoughts and or questions on this? I see a question in the chat that now you say don't div single divs, but they do a div at the top nav. Yeah, that's fair. I think they probably did that because it's just a box. And so that way they could color it in. But yeah, it's not a great. Yeah, it's just because they just need to color this in. Usually this would be text or this would be something else. Yeah, that's oh, thanks, Christina. Thanks for doing that. Yeah. So if you don't have anything, like you don't have a paragraph, you don't have any sort of information, you can just put a div here and then you can give it a height and a width, and then it just allows you to do that. So that's really kind of, that's a great point out, Adam. These are all divs, right? These are all open and closed divs with actually nothing in it. That's strictly because we're dealing with, there's no content. Let's say that this was an image. Like, let's say each of these yellow were images, or this was an image. You wouldn't need it as a div, you would just have it as an image, right? But it's just for the sake of this assignment, and they just wanted to assign a width and a height and some color. Great point out there. Okay. Any other kind of clarification for these divs and how this works?
I had a question. So is like the plotting blocks when we do the actual images, is that literally kind of the same thing as this?
Yeah. This is the
Okay.
same assignment, but instead of doing actual margin, we're just doing we're using display flex.
Okay. All right. Cool.
Yeah, same sort of thing. You just have a div that you can assign a height, the width, the background color, some margin, etc., etc.
All right.
Okay. Great. So if I were to run this, let me click on this. Oh, so you can see that though, let me clear this off. My code is there, right? I have all this code in here, but I haven't assigned any height, width, You can see it's all up here. When you have a div, if you don't assign a height or a width, it'll just be nothing, right? It won't show up. So now I need to go into my CSS and actually build out some of this. So if I'm coming here, we already provided some starting CSS. So I'm gonna come here. I'm gonna make we call this style.css. Perfect. I'm gonna come here. Híjole. Sick. Okay, let's just build it out. We've got a container. Right, and that's my biggest one. That's got a width of 950 pixels. It's going to have a background color of silver. And it's got a margin of 0. Auto. Cool. I've got a dot top nav. It's going to have a height of 150 pixels and a background color of green. Perfect. I've got a side nav. It's going to have a height of 300 pixels. And I'm just copying from the left. I'm not sure why it's not working. I've got a dot main. It's going to have a height of we'll do 400 pixels. $700. Sorry, this is painfully kind of copying what you guys already have. Oh, this is 120. And 60. Save this. Come here and I refresh. Okay. So here's what I've got so far. Right? I have got all of this information. I've got my green bar. I've got my blue, my 3 yellows, my purple, and my red. Now, the reason that this is in the middle is because I said MX auto for my container, or sorry, 0 pix auto, and that just will put your margin in the middle. It'll just kind of center it by itself. And so this allows me to kind of get here. Now, what I need is, if I'm looking at my HTML, there's 2 classes that I need to kind of handle. The first one is going to be my, it's this row right here, right? Because I see that I need my side nav, so my blue, and my red to be side by side. Now I could go in and say that it's display block, but we learned of a new tool on Friday called display flex that I can utilize in my code to kind of make them go side by side. So lastly, I'm going to say dot row. And I'm going to say display flex. If I come here, cool. Now I get them side by side. Perfect. Now remember, this was display flex on dot row is the parent. Sorry. Of this side nav and this red box. And the parent of my yellows, right? And so now because they can be side by side, it allows them all to kind of be next to one another. Now there's one thing that I've got to handle on quite a few of these, and that is to deal with the margin and the padding, right? So if I'm looking at the image that I want to have, I see that there's some space here. And because these are even, right? If I look at that, these are lined up, it tells me that they'd have the same amount of margin. And when you're dealing with margin, especially from like a pixel perspective, it's kind of just plug and play and you mess around and see what works. So if I were to sit here, I'm thinking about my sub content and my advertisement, right? So I can say margin. Let's just try margin. Let's do 5 pixels. And because they're the same, I want to have them the same here. So let's see what that looks like. Okay, we're starting to look like it, but looks like there's a little bit more space, right? There's a little bit more space that's needed. So let's build out 7. And if you hold, so if you're trying to deal with code, you want to do the same thing to multiple lines, you can hold the Option or Alt key and hold that down and then click on multiple spots, and then it will do both. And then you can say 7. Now it'll change both. So instead of having to go and say 7 and then 7, you can do that as well. So if I refresh, okay, starting to look a little bit better. Let's come here. Let's go 10. Now refresh. Okay. A little bit better. We've got some other things that we're going to have to deal with. But overall, not bad at all. Now, if I'm looking at this as well, I've got some space in between these two, right? And I've got some space just around this red. I don't really have, like I have a little bit of that, but it looks like I have a little bit more space that I need to push out. So if I'm looking at this, what is the div? So let's look at the code. What controls both of these to this blue and this red box? What has both of those?
The main one.
Well, that's true. The row does. Okay. And then within that, row has both of these. And within just my red box, what controls my red box in totality? Is it row or is it main? Yeah, main, right? My main has 2 things. Is my red box, right? And if we were to kind of a little secret is here main is red, and we're kind of looking here. And so if I want to push these away, what I can do also is mess with some padding. Right? And again, you can normally start with like 5 is normal, 10. Let's see what this looks like. Okay, looks a lot better. Okay, that's great, right? It's a little bit thick, but it looks a lot better than kind of what we had. And we can start building some different things, right? If I need my main to be to the left, right? I want to push it away from my blue box. If I wanted to push it, like push this red box away this way from this blue, what is a tool that I could use? Anybody know?
Between or around?
I want to push space between this red box and this blue box.
Oh, like margin.
Yeah. Now specifically, I've already set some margin. I just want margin on this side. So what would I do?
Or you put the main one margin right.
So if I do
So
main margin right, that's going to give me margin this way.
oh, okay.
Yeah, margin left, right? On my left side, I want some margin. So I'm gonna say margin left. And then I'm going to say, I don't know, let's say 20 pixels. I save it. Okay, I'm gonna refresh. Perfect. Okay, that's looking a little bit more like what we have, right? We're gonna have to still build out some things. This is starting to look great, right? All I had to do, instead of dealing with the different margins in between these guys, all I did was this display flex. And that automatically put them here. And then what I had is I just had margin, and then it will evenly put them there, which is awesome. Yeah, so today is lecture day. So moving forward, every Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday is lecture day. We no longer have office hour days. We have office hour before each lecture, but moving forward, it is Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursdays for the rest of the boot camp. Programming basics was just a unique case. Moving forward, we will always have an office hour, and this is what we're doing. This is just our office hour that I'm kind of teaching and kind of helping here. But it's just an office hour, and then at 5 o'clock Pacific time is when we will always have lecture. Okay. So you got this advertisement. That's great. We're crushing that. We've got this sub content. There's a little bit, it looks a little bit unique. It could just be how mine looks, but we can mess with it, right? We've got our main. Now we still see that there's some issues all around, right? Because I still need it to look different. I need these to be uniform. This looks a little long, in my opinion, right? This is like a little bit high. These are not really spaced accordingly. So we'll just kind of mess with it there. Cool. So now we need to deal with some of this other stuff, right? We just need to keep, and with CSS, it's the best and the worst, is that sometimes you got to just mess around with it and just to make it look just right. Now, I will say you can go crazy, and on your exam, I would really encourage you to not go crazy with CSS. Like, you can go to a certain extent, but you want to make sure all of your content and everything is there, and then you kind of work with it. And especially moving forward in the boot camp, obviously this one, because we're learning CSS, that's one that you do want to focus on. But you can, like, getting the real nuance, see this pixel 7 versus 8 pixels, see that towards the end. Make sure you get all the content there. Okay. So what I also see, let's start from the top and the bottom, or the top, is I need my green. I need to have some padding or some, I need to have something different here. So if I see that these are all even, right, away, now my gray box, I've got some, this is the edge, right? And this is where my content is. What element or what part of CSS pushes information inside equally? Yeah, padding. Great job, guys. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's start at the top. We're going to add in some padding. And let's just do 20 pixels. Great. And that's going to push my content in a little bit. So if I come here and I refresh. All right. Now it's starting to look a little bit better, right? We still have some things that we'll work through and figure out, but it's starting to look a little bit better, which is awesome. Cool. So we've worked on that. We pushed that out. Now let's start from this green and push this down. And we see that, okay, I need this to be A equal, right? And then B, I need this push down. So if I see that, I'm going to go, and you could go to where both of these have margin top, or you could do this one and have margin bottom. Either one would work. I'm going to go ahead and go with the green to where I'm going to add in some margin bottom, but both would be fine. The reason I'm doing green is because instead of adding it to multiple things, I'm just going to add it to one. So that's my logic there. But if you would have said margin top on this guy and this guy, or this entire div, if you would have said margin top, that would have also worked just fine. So I'm gonna say this is 20 pixels. Come and refresh. Okay, this is starting to look a lot better. This is starting to look a lot better. Cool. Now, when we get to the side nav, this blue, that's fine. And we're looking at it, it's starting to look a little bit better, right? From the location perspective, it's kind of halfway through this purple. That makes sense to me. We deal with this main. This is starting to look, now there's some things, one little thing that's off in this. Can anybody see what that is? Red and green are not the same length. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, exactly, Lucas, the alignment. And this is where, again, this is where really kind of some of this width and height and these margins can come in and kind of mess with you. So if I were to look at this, and I would say height is 150 pixels, but I don't have any sort of anything, I would want to either make my red a little bit wider. So I'm gonna say, let's say 710. Let's see what that does. Perfect. Yeah, so I said 710. If you were to say, again, if you were to say something like 709, right? And that's where I'm talking about like nuancy. You can be like, oh, that's actually more. It's up to you. Like you're on your exam. There, we don't have like a specific these are the pixels it needs to be, because also everybody's image looks different, right? And so if you were to say 709 or 710, as long as it's fairly close, that's going to be a-okay. Yeah, somebody pointed out my purple is short, right? So maybe we add in another 10 from here. Okay, purple's dead on. Great. We've kind of done everything we've needed, right? We've got it display flex. These are even. These are even from what we can tell, right? And I'm sure if you really went like to the depth, maybe they're a pixel or two off. That's okay, right? We're all just trying to learn. The blue, oops. The blue is it's equal to the top and about halfway to the purple, which if I'm looking at this, equal to the top, about halfway to the purple. That looks great. Our green has some padding in it. So all the way around, it's equal with my red, it's equal with my blue. It's not super skinny, right? I think that would have been if we would have had something like, this, we would say that doesn't really match the image, right? So if it's 1 to 5 pixels off, it's fine. If you're seeing this, you're like, oh, maybe I fixed that. And we go like, okay, here's 150. And okay, so this looks like the image. And I would say that if you submitted this from this assignment, this is a perfect job. Are there any thoughts, questions, concerns, confusions for what we did? Also, did this help you with understanding sort of margin and padding and flex?
Can you really quickly, I'll also put it in the chat, just margin border padding and content, just like tell me what it does. So for example, margin, that pushes inwards.
It pushes things away,
Away.
right? So like margin pushes things away. Padding pushes things inwards, right? And what was the other ones you had?
Border.
Yeah, so border is just going to be whatever your border is, right? And so that's just the end of the element.
So it
I think
doesn't do
Christina, I think you had something that was great. I can't remember if you put it in Discord or what it was, but border is like if I just wanted it to look like I had a border, I could just do that. And it's like wherever the end of the element is. Padding is whatever's between the border and the actual element itself. So let's say that this box, or sorry, let's say that even here, right? Like this container, its border is, let me make this black. Its border is this, right? But we wanted to push all of the material inwards. So this is really where it is. And so we use padding to separate the actual elements themselves from the border itself. Margin has to do with, let me move this over. Ooh, that's tough. I'll redo it. Margin has to do with, so here's our border. Here's our padding, or sorry, the elements. The stuff in between is the padding. And then the margin is if I wanted anything to be, away from here, how different, or the distance between that and maybe, let's say I had another big element, right? That would be the margin, the distance between these two. So somebody asked, if the margin increases, do the height and width also increase as well? No, they don't, right? This element doesn't move. It just or change. It just says how far the next element or this element can be.
So pretty much the content is just the content, border is the border of whatever it is. What we really need to pay attention to is padding, which is inwards, and margin outwards. The other two don't really do anything apart from holding the content, right?
Yeah. So can you repeat that a little bit?
So padding is inwards and margin is outwards. And then the border doesn't really push in or out. It just contains, it's just the border of the content.
Yep. It's the edge of the content. Yeah.
And then the content is just the content itself. But those who don't really do anything apart from being the content is the margin and the padding that I guess I had the question of what they did. And
yeah, so padding pushes your content inwards.
Yeah.
Margin pushes it away, like on the outside of the border.
Okay.
And I think Christina, let me pull it up. Hold on. Yep. Christina posted a cool, oops, sorry, let me clear that. Cool thing here with the CSS box model. So that's where your width, your padding, your border, and your margin. So you sort of think about it this way as well. Okay, does that help? Did that help clarify anything? Let me pull up my,
Yes, thank you.
yeah, of course. I don't know where my code and, oh,
I got a question.
Yeah.
For just homework in general, when we're doing the homework, does it matter how we code it, or does it just matter that it looks exactly like the image? Because compared to what you did, what I did was some of it was different.
yeah, I would say that as long as it's relative, like there's one thing I would say is there's a million ways to do the same thing.
Mhm.
Right. And so it's okay as long as it's sort of, if you were to basically give me something like use Tailwind or Bootstrap to create this, I would say that's an issue, right? Using things that are outside of sort of the scope. If you just created this or you just did it a little bit different, that's very okay. Because either it is something that made sense to you and it works, and that's great. So that's A. B, there's quite a few ways to do the same thing. And C, maybe yours is more efficient, or maybe it's not, and mine is a little bit more efficient, and this is just a different way to do it, but they have the same outcome. All are very okay. So if your homework looks a little bit different, that's very okay. As long as you are around the same realm, if that makes sense. If you use like some weird library, then that kind of be an issue.
Oh no, well, yeah, it's almost the same thing, just few things I did differently.
Oh, then that's very okay.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Somebody asked, are we going to, is the exam going to be 10 questions? So your exam, we're going to talk about it tomorrow. It's going to be very different than what your other exam was like. So what it will be like is this. You can see sort of the breakdown. This is just within the JavaScript section. You'll see the breakdown here of all the different things that you need to have. And we're going to walk through this. On Thursday, we're going to build a kind of a belt prep image, if you will. But what we'll do is you will go on the belt exam, just like you did last time, and you are going to enter in a code. So here you go. Here's your code. You enter it in. And then what we will give you is it's going to be your exam, but it'll look like something like this. It's not going to be this. Something like this that you are going to have to create yourself. That you are going to have to build out on your own. To where when, so we've learned sort of this, right? This HTML here, right? We've already learned how to do that. Right? You guys have done that. We've learned these guys. This is just a drop down. So you don't actually have to like convert things into Celsius. This can be hard coded. That's fine. So whenever you see something like that, it's just, can you recreate the same thing, not the actual functionality in the background. You'll have some images that you'll need to put, and we'll provide you with all images. And then you will have some functionality. So when the user clicks on a city, it's going to, when it clicks that, you're going to have some alert that pops up. And that's a JavaScript stuff that we haven't learned yet, that we'll learn. We're going to do a refresher of JavaScript today, though you guys are just coming off of it. We're going to do a refresher today. Tomorrow, we're going to learn JavaScript and kind of what we need to learn for this. And then you will have kind of an understanding. And then on Thursday, we are going to build out like a belt prep sort of thing. So that way you guys have it, but it's going to be very different. It's not questions. You are going to have 24 hours to recreate an actual image just like this, similar to like your assignments. Let's see. Okay. Are there any more questions?
Yes. So I would like to ask I mean I'm a little bit behind, but when you have H1 and you want your H1 to have like two colors, how do you do that?
H1 to have two colors?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. So let's say we wanted to have an H1 to have two colors. I would do something like this. I'm going to say H1 and let's say hello. I wanted hello to be
White maybe.
okay, so why don't we do this? We'll say hello. And then what you could do is within this, you could do a span. But if I'm going to make it an ID, I'm going to say world. And then I'm going to say world. And so now what I'm doing is I'm able to, what it will see, like if I look at this and I view this, I get a hello world, right?
Okay.
Great. Now I want this to be white and this to be blue, let's say. Well, what I can do is in my style, I've got two things, right? I have my dot hello, right? That's my class.
Yeah.
That both of them are in. I'm gonna say color white.
Okay.
But then I also have my span tag. Sorry. That allows me to target specifically just this word and this exclamation point. So then I could say world, but instead of color white, I want blue. So now I saved that. If I come and I refresh, hello is white, world is blue. So using that element like a span tag allows you
Yeah.
to identify kind of in between. It's a really popular element to, if you wanted to break out something like this, if you wanted to quote something in your HTML, if you wanted to kind of really in the middle of a sentence, like we just saw,
Yeah.
in the middle of a sentence, if I just wanted to target this word or even just one letter, right? I could do that. Like if I just did a span around,
H.
just around this E, right? If I just wanted that, I can. I just have this span. It has an ID. You see that just specifically that one.
Oh wow, it's amazing.
Yeah. And to be fair, since that's the only span, you technically wouldn't need an ID. You could just say span, because that's the only one that exists.
Okay.
And I save that. And I come here. And if I refresh, it should be the exact same. And it is.
So what about if both words should be on the same line?
Both of them on the same line.
Yeah, hello
That's
world.
just because, yeah, that's just because I don't have enough space because they're both within the
Okay,
circle.
okay,
If I would have gone like here. It's just because it's in, I accidentally put it within this row div. And so there's not enough space.
okay.
If I refresh, now it's hello world. Down here.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, of course. Great question. Yeah, so again, Lucas, span is just a way that we can target elements specifically. So if I'm in the middle of a paragraph or I'm in the middle of a word, I want to target one letter, I want to target one word, one sentence, I can do that, right? Via a span tag. It just is a way that allows me to kind of pick out a portion. And then you will typically see, like if you were to go to like a news article, you typically see a lot of span tags. And so you would want to have a class, like let's go to espn.com. Let's see their code and see if they got any spans. Sure they do somewhere. You might have to look a lot in the code, but yeah, it'd be dependent. I mean, you probably won't find it here, but yeah, lots of stuff going on. Yeah, but a span tag, there's quite a few, like especially when you're getting to like when you're reading articles and stuff, you might use a span tag. So it's usually a good idea to have a class associated with that.
Oh, quick question. So let's say for the part where you use the span tag, if we just wanted, let's say, change that color right there, would you recommend just doing like right there span and then style equals color like within the HTML?
No, so that's called inline styling, and we will, I believe we take points off for inline styling. So that's
Yeah.
true. You can basically just have, let's see if we inline style on this thing. I don't think we do per se. We'll go back to ESPN because they did a lot of inline styling. Okay. Inline styling means that I don't need to actually have a style sheet necessarily. I can just style this element. So if it goes here. Wherever it says,
Oh, right there.
I don't see. Oh yeah, style equals, and then it gives a border. That is what we call inline styling. So instead of actually having a style sheet, you're just doing it there. You can see that you can put like border 0, 0 point, none, margin, auto, text line, center. So that's styling this element. Now we will take off because ideally you don't want to have that. You don't want to have it outside of that because then if you're trying to change things, let's say that there's a class or there's something associated, you are having to change many, many, many things. And it makes it for a little slot. It's pretty hard to read. Like if we look at this, right? If I just look at this code, exactly, Vega, it's really crowded. If you were to ask me, like this code is kind of hard to read. You don't really want to read this because you're like, oh gosh, this looks awful. And so just taking out one extra thing is a little bit easier than and just having it live on your style sheet. And that's a much more kind of put together project. So no, I believe, let me go check the yellow belt, but I believe we take off if you do any sort of inline styling.
Yeah, I did that on one of the assignments.
So if you do inline styling, we will take an entire point off, which is pretty heavy because you can only miss 2 points. So yeah, that's via called. So you have to have it all on an external sheet.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Of course. Any other questions, friends?
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
So since the test is something that we're creating, I'm assuming the system's not going to be grading it. What's the
No.
turnaround time since we have 3 attempts?
Well, that's a wonderful question. That is something that Christina and I and everybody will be all hands on deck. Depends on when you submit it. So it is hand graded. So I or Christina look at your code, look at your test, go through this sheet, and then if you did it all, then we're good to go. And if not, then you'll still get a grade. I mean, even if you fail, you still get a grade.
But you'll let us know. So that
Yeah,
way
yeah. We'll
Please
send
let
you an
me know.
email that says, here's your, congratulations on your belt exam. Here's what you got, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I would say usually the turnaround time is by like Wednesday is our goal because there's also, I think there's like 60 something of you. So given if everybody does it this weekend, Wednesday is our goal to have a turnaround for the first one. Once you get it, now if you're the last person, then that means on Wednesday you will get sort of your grade. We don't wait until everybody's graded to send out stuff. So as soon as it gets graded, we'll send it out to you. If there is a retake needed, then I will, when I send you your grade, if you need a better grade, then I will also say there's 2 things that can happen. And we're going to talk about the exam tomorrow. And we'll kind of walk through and I'll give you an example of what we'll need to build. But I will say, hey, either you're pretty close, here's a new code. Like you are good to go. Good luck on the next one. Let me know when you start it and let me know when you complete it. So that's the first one. Second thing is if you are way off, if you are not even close, what I will typically say is, can you go to Dojo Hall before you get a new code? I need you to go to Dojo Hall because there's some fundamental things that need to be explained and or you're doing incorrectly. And then once that's done, the TA will then Slack me and say, hey, okay, I met with Will and he's now ready for a second code. We did an exam walkthrough. Okay, cool. And then I will send you a second code. So, or you can email me and say, hey, I met with Christina. We walked through this. Can I get a second code? And I'll say yes. So usually by Wednesday.
So the feedback should be a little more specific then in terms of like, hey, this is an area you could improve upon if you're close.
Yeah. If you're close, I'll tell you, here's the things that like, you'll see the weight and we will kind of tell you what you missed. So if you did incorrect stuff here, like then you'll know, okay, this is where I got points off. I'll also have comments that say, hey, you took off, you have inline styling, that killed you. Change that over to an external. Like if you were to do a couple little things, then you had an inline styling that got you. It's like, it's a pretty heavy one. Like, just don't do inline styling, and then here's your code, right? But if you just didn't do any JavaScript, or everything was inline styling, and you miss a lot of stuff, then there's going to be an issue. Our first thing we will do is run your HTML through an HTML validator. So that'll be like the first thing we do. So if you guys haven't done that, I would suggest, and we'll make sure that we do that on Thursday. Whenever we do our belt prep exam kind of course, is at the end, we'll run it through a validator and make sure we're good. And I'll show you guys how to fix those errors.
All right, perfect. Thank you.
Of course. Somebody asked, do we request a new code via email or Discord? So if it's on the weekend, you'll probably want to do Discord. And or you can email as well, either one. But if it's the weekend, I mean, I don't respond to emails on the weekend. So if you're wanting a new code, TAs will have access to those. So I would say you could rely on Dojo Hall. Now they do have access to who is good to get a new code and who is not. So if you try to sneak and I say, hey, you need to meet with somebody, and then you don't, and then, you know, I don't have any sort of validation from the TA that anybody met with you, and you ask, can I get a new code? They're going to see in the notes that, no, you need to meet with somebody. So don't try to sneak around it. We'll get you. So somebody asked about the warning in the HTML file. Yep. I mean, it's clear here that you can't have any warnings in your HTML file. So those are important. You need to make sure you get those handled. It is not as bad as it may seem. So I promise that. I promise that. It's not scary. It is challenging on the first one, potentially. But if you guys are walking through these assignments and the core assignments, then you should be A-okay. Like, yeah, you should be just fine. Yep, Christina's right. Absolutely use a validator. So, okay, I'm going to stop the recording here, and I'm going to run to the restroom real fast. And